The U.S. President Donald Trump has returned from his visit to China after 2 days of talks with President Xi Jinping that saw both sides trade praise and tout progress in stabilizing what they agreed is the world's most important relationship. Now, upon his arrival in Washington, D.C., Trump hailed the quote-unquote fantastic trade deals and said that a lot of different problems were settled, although no major agreements were announced before he departed Beijing.
All I can say is that was a great success. It was fantastic. We made great deals, we did great trade deals, we had great relationships, and a lot of things have happened and you'll be hearing about it. But that was a tremendous success. I think it really was a historic moment. Thank you very much.
Now, the U.S. and China have also not announced any major developments on issues like Iran and Taiwan that were discussed at the Beijing summit. Now, this is despite Trump saying that he and Chinese leader Xi Jinping talked extensively about Iran during the summit. He had said that Xi agreed with him that a nuclear-armed Iran is a bad idea and that the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened. Well, Trump went on to say that Xi even offered to help find an endgame to the conflict, but the U.S. president insisted he did not ask Xi to put pressure on Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting he don't need favors.
I'm not asking for any favors, because when you ask for favors, you have to do favors in return. We don't need favors. We wiped out their armed forces, essentially. We may have to do a little cleanup work because we had a little ceasefire, I guess you'd call it, but we have a blockade that's so effective.
All right, to discuss more on this, our correspondent Susan Terani is now joining us live from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Well, Trump has now returned from, as he called it, historic talks and meeting with his, he called him friend, Xi Jinping. First of all, what do you make of this trip?
I think the trip was very heavy on symbolism. And when you meet with an adversary like China, where the United States ultimately considers it, although President Trump has now has been trying to treat Xi Jinping as a partner, no news is good news at the end of the day. On the one hand, you know, as I mentioned, it was very symbolic. It was high on symbolism. Both sides seem to know that they have to lower the temperature in this strategic rivalry that they have going on. Manage competition seemed to be the phrase of the trip. But on the other hand, we really didn't hear that the president gave away much to Xi Jinping. Now, we can say the same thing for Xi, although President Trump says that we'll be hearing about major deals, possibly regarding aircraft and agriculture as well. That's going to be music to the ear of many of the farmers here in the United States who are suffering because of high diesel prices. And notably, the soybean farmers are beef and cattle farmers. They really need that outside market right now. But until it happens, and until we really see it, and see it as a concrete development, these are all words. The president also said that they both agree that the Strait of Hormuz should be open and that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We haven't really heard so many words regarding that, although there was sort of a vague, ambiguous statement from the Chinese, but we really didn't hear those exact words from the Chinese, at least not yet. Really, the devil's going to be in the detail in the next few days and possibly a few weeks to see whether or not China will ultimately aid the U.S. in any way. I think it was interesting that the president on a number of occasions said that he was not going to seek Xi's assistance. And the reason for that was because he didn't want to ask Xi for favors, because when you ask someone for favors, in President Trump's words, then they would want something in return. Of course, the issue of Taiwan is going to be central moving forward, considering the fact that there is a military package on hold, some $14 billion, that the Trump administration was due to send to Taiwan. President Trump says, I may do it, I may not do it. Xi directly asked the president not to do that. Now, President Trump said that he didn't want to talk about Taiwan, but he said that he respected Xi enough for Xi to talk about Taiwan, but he appear to not have made any promises. So as long as the U.S. maintains its strategic ambiguity, and many China hawks say that the U.S. should ultimately arm Taiwan as a deterrent, then this trip can be deemed as a success. On the other hand, President Trump says, he may hold off that sale of weapons to Taiwan because he doesn't want to, quote unquote, see a war erupting.
And so you've pretty much summarized everything that went along in this whole, of course, meeting. And of course, as in Trump's words himself, we're going to be hearing a lot, or when it comes to trade deals or whatever, we're going to be hearing more in the coming days, slowly. But of course, major takeaways on Iran and Taiwan. We've also heard from Trump saying that when asked on the issue of Taiwan, he said, "I'm not looking to have somebody go independent." Now, these are things that it's not just, of course, the U.S. and China discussion, but the whole world is watching, especially with the countries like Japan and South Korea. All of these countries are now waiting for these, the concrete, maybe a concrete statement on that. How do you analyze that?
Yeah, that's a very valid point, and I thought it was very telling that on board Air Force One, after meeting with Xi Jinping, one of the first calls that the president made was to Sanai Takeichi of Japan. She had an interview and she said that as allies, President Trump informed me about the details of the conversation. She said that I'm not going to spill all the beans and all the details, but it was interesting that the president did talk to the Japanese prime minister on his way back, really signaling that there are alliances, despite the fact that, on the surface, it seems that Xi and the president are getting along, but America does have its own alliances. Again, as you mentioned, I'm glad you brought that up until we see something concrete in a concrete statement, because China has made numerous promises. He made a lot more promises to Barack Obama, actually, when he visited China. And a lot of those promises didn't come to fruition. China has been saying that they will buy more soybeans for years. And, while there have been trade relations here and there, China continues to have a surplus in American markets, and it hasn't been the other way around. Now, Scott Bessent said that they could possibly work together on AI and technology. That'll be interesting to see. But again, there are so many here in the United States that they believe that there should be guardrails against China when it comes to AI, because the United States right now is leading. So again, there are just a lot of details in all of this. The pageantry was really something we seldom see. I mean, the fact that she invited President Trump into his home, that was really a huge gesture. But nonetheless, as I said, if we don't get anything concrete out of this visit, just the fact that, America wasn't able to give anything away, that might actually be to the benefit of this White House. But expectations were that there weren't going to be any breakthroughs, and I don't really think we did see any breakthrough.
And it's interesting to know about how important this would be for Trump, because considering the fact that, of course, he has to also convince the home front, U.S., and especially right before the midterm elections in November. Well, at least one thing he's done is he's invited Xi Jinping back in the U.S., isn't it?
Yeah, about September 24th or so, he said around that time she would come to the United States. It does coincide usually that time of year with the United Nations General Assembly. In October, a lot of trade deals are set to expire, so the timing of that visit is going to be very interesting as well. And, to keep the lines of communication open, if they can manage this competition and this rivalry, where, again, something out of the ordinary doesn't erupt, I think that that'll say a lot. But yeah, President Trump, he's also facing a lot of problems economically here at home. His polling numbers regarding the economy aren't great, high gas prices as well. But then you look at Xi in China, he's also facing a lot of slew of domestic problems economically. So it might be to the benefit of Xi perhaps to open his markets. But, again, we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely, Susan. Well, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about that. Of course, we'll get back to you as and when we get more information on that. Appreciate it.